The message arrived on Sophie Grant's data pad at exactly 2:47 in the morning. She had been awake anyway, reviewing case files from Earth's underground legal academy for the 100th time. The pale blue light from the screen illuminated her small apartment in the lower districts of New Seattle, casting shadows across stacks of legal texts that most humans never bothered to read anymore. Application accepted. Report to Arbitrium Prime Station within 14 solar cycles. Sophie's hands trembled as she read the words again. Then again. She had done it. After 6 months of research, finding obscure loopholes in galactic bureaucracy, and routing her application through a neutral third-party verification system that stripped away species identifiers, she had actually done it. She was in. She would take the trial of advocates. Her roommate, a medical student named Grace, stumbled out of her bedroom rubbing her eyes. "Sophie? What's wrong?" "It's 3 in the morning. I got in," Sophie whispered. "Grace, I actually got in." Grace's eyes went wide. She knew what Sophie had been attempting. Everyone at the academy knew. It was the kind of impossible dream that people smiled at politely before changing the subject. Humans didn't take the trial of advocates. Humans weren't allowed to take the trial of advocates. That had been the rule for 200 years, ever since the Galactic Judiciary Council had classified Earth as a Class 12 Deathworld and deemed its inhabitants emotionally unstable and unsuitable for impartial legal practice. "They don't know you're human," Grace said slowly. "Sophie, what happens when they find out?" "They'll have to honor their own admission," Sophie replied, though her voice carried less certainty than her words. "The bylaws are clear. Once accepted, a candidate cannot be removed except for criminal violations or academic fraud. I didn't lie on my application. I just didn't specify my species of origin." Grace looked worried, but she hugged Sophie anyway. "You're either the bravest person I know or the craziest." "Probably both," Sophie admitted. 12 days later, Sophie stood in the docking bay of Arbitrium Prime, the massive neutral station that served as the headquarters for the Galactic Judiciary Council. Ships from dozens of worlds gleamed under the artificial lights. Beings of every imaginable shape and size moved through the crowds. She saw the towering Kelvorians with their 6 legs and crystalline skin. A group of small, furry Plenthians chattered to each other in their melodic language. 2 Methodians, tall and thin with skin like polished metal, walked past without acknowledging anyone around them. Sophie pulled her travel case behind her, trying not to feel intimidated by the sheer scale of everything. Earth had been part of the galactic community for 80 years, but most humans never left their home planet. The cost was too high and the welcome was rarely warm. Deathworlders, they called them. Survivors of a planet so hostile that it had forged them into something dangerous. She found her way to the registration hall, a vast chamber with ceilings that disappeared into artificial clouds. Hundreds of candidates lined up at processing stations, each one representing the best legal minds their worlds had to offer. Sophie joined the queue, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone around her must hear it. The registration clerk was a Centauri, a species known for their empathy and gentle nature. Her name tag read Lydia, in 6 different languages. She had soft purple skin and large, kind eyes that seemed to see right through Sophie. "Identification, please," Lydia said, her voice like wind chimes. Sophie handed over her data chip. Lydia inserted it into her terminal and began scrolling through the information. Her expression remained neutral for a moment, then her eyes widened slightly. She looked up at Sophie, then back at the screen, then at Sophie again. "You're from Earth?" Lydia said quietly. "Yes," Sophie replied, keeping her voice steady. "Is there a problem?" I need to call a supervisor. Please wait here." The supervisor arrived within minutes and he brought others with him. Soon, Sophie was surrounded by a cluster of officials, all speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Other candidates in line began to notice the commotion. Whispers spread through the hall like wildfire. "It's a human. Earthling. Deathworlder." The crowd parted as a tall Methodian approached. His movements were precise and calculated, and his expression held the same warmth as a glacier. The name badge on his formal robes identified him as Kelvin, Council Chair of Admissions. "This is highly irregular," Kelvin announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. "Humans are barred from the trial of advocates. This admission is hereby revoked." Sophie had prepared for this moment. She had rehearsed it 1,000 times in her tiny apartment, in the shower, during long walks through the city. Still, standing here with hundreds of eyes watching her, she felt her mouth go dry. But she forced herself to speak. "Under what authority?" she asked. Kelvin's metallic features registered something that might have been surprise. The ban has been in place for 2 centuries. Yes, but it's not a law, Sophie continued, her legal training kicking in. It's a policy decision made by an administrative council. According to Section 7 of the Galactic Judicial Charter, no candidate who has been properly accepted through the official verification system can be removed except for cause. Specifically, criminal violations or academic fraud. I have committed neither. Your species is unsuitable for legal practice, Kelvin stated flatly. That's discrimination based on species origin, which violates Section 12 of the same charter, Sophie countered. If you revoke my admission now, you'll be breaking your own bylaws. I have witnesses. She gestured to the crowd around them, including candidates from 46 other worlds who are about to watch you apply different standards to different applicants. The silence in the hall was absolute. Lydia, the Centauri clerk, was watching Sophie with something that looked like admiration. Other officials shifted uncomfortably. Kelvin's face remained expressionless, but Sophie could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Your application exploited a loophole, Kelvin said. I used the system exactly as designed, Sophie replied. If there's a flaw in your verification process that allowed species information to be omitted, that's an administrative problem, not grounds for rejecting a qualified candidate. Kelvin stared at her for a long moment. Sophie could feel sweat running down her back, but she held his gaze. She had not come this far, had not risked everything to back down now. Very well, Kelvin finally said, each word clipped and cold. You will be granted provisional status. However, you should know that the trial begins with a physical aptitude assessment. It is designed to ensure candidates meet basic galactic standards for endurance and capability. Most species find it challenging. I expect you will fail within the first few hours. When you do, your admission will be terminated and you will return to Earth. He turned and walked away, his robes sweeping behind him like a blade. The other officials dispersed, though several cast curious glances back at Sophie. The crowd of candidates slowly began to move again, though Sophie noticed that most of them kept their distance from her now. She was marked. The human. The Deathworlder. The one who didn't belong. Only Lydia remained, still standing behind her terminal. She smiled at Sophie, a small but genuine expression of warmth. That was brave, Lydia said softly. I'll process your registration properly now. Welcome to the trial of advocates, Sophie Grant. I hope you prove him wrong. Sophie managed to smile in return, though her legs felt weak. Thank you. I intend to. The grand arena was unlike anything Sophie had ever seen. The massive dome stretched so high overhead that artificial clouds drifted near its peak. Thousands of candidates filled the staging area, their voices creating a constant hum of nervous energy. Sophie stood among them, trying not to feel small and out of place. A holographic display materialized in the center of the arena, showing the obstacle course they would face. It looked simple enough. A series of walls to climb, barriers to navigate, and various physical challenges scattered throughout. The final obstacle appeared to be some kind of locked door that candidates would need to open using problem-solving skills. Basic Galactic Standard Fitness Assessment, announced a neutral computer voice. All candidates will complete the course individually. Time limit is 30 minutes. Failure to complete within the time limit results in immediate disqualification. Sophie studied the course layout carefully. The walls were about 3 meters high. The gravity was set to 0.8, which the display helpfully noted was standard comfortable gravity for most species. The temperature was a pleasant 21 degrees. Everything seemed designed to be manageable but not easy. What Sophie noticed, however, was that manageable meant very different things depending on where you came from. The candidates began running the course in groups of 10. Sophie watched as a Calvorian candidate, tall and graceful, attempted to scale the first wall. The crystalline being struggled, their 6 legs scrambling for purchase on the smooth surface. They eventually made it over, but the effort left them breathing hard. A Plenthian candidate, small and furry, gave up halfway through when their arms simply couldn't support their weight on the hanging bars. They sat down on the mat below, looking dejected and embarrassed. Next group, proceed to starting positions, the computer announced. Sophie found herself in a group with 9 other candidates. One of them, a Valkorian named Derek, towered over her. His species was known for producing warrior scholars, beings who prided themselves on both physical prowess and mental acuity. His golden eyes swept over Sophie with barely concealed disdain. The human, he said, his voice deep and rumbling. I'm surprised you made it this far. Tell me, do they have medical staff standing by for when you collapse? Your species may be stubborn, but stubbornness won't carry you over those walls. Sophie didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting with words. Begin, the computer voice announced. The candidates launched forward. Sophie started at an easy jog, watching the others around her. Derek sprinted ahead, clearly trying to establish dominance. 2 other candidates followed his pace. The rest, including Sophie, moved more cautiously. The first wall loomed ahead. Derek reached it first and began climbing. His technique was good, Sophie noticed. He found handholds efficiently and pulled himself up with practiced ease. But she could see the strain in his movements. 0.8 gravity might be standard, but it was clearly more than he was used to. Sophie reached the wall and didn't slow down. She jumped, caught the top edge with both hands and pulled herself up in one smooth motion. Her arms barely registered the effort. Earth's gravity was 1.0, and she'd grown up running, climbing, and training in conditions that would exhaust most species. This felt like exercising underwater after a lifetime on dry land. She dropped down the other side and continued running. Behind her, she heard gasps of surprise from the crowd watching in the stands. The hanging bars came next. Sophie watched another candidate attempt them, swinging carefully from bar to bar, their face twisted with concentration. When Sophie's turn came, she moved across them quickly, her grip strong and sure. Her shoulders felt loose and relaxed. Back on Earth, she'd done pull-ups every morning before classes. This was nothing. Derek was ahead of her now, but she could see him slowing down. His breathing was labored and sweat gleamed on his skin. The temperature, comfortable for most species, was probably warmer than his home world. Sophie felt perfectly fine. 21 degrees was actually quite pleasant compared to New Seattle's humid summers. She passed Derek at the balance beam obstacle. He was moving carefully, placing each foot with precision. Sophie simply ran across it, her years of training on uneven ground giving her natural balance that the smooth beam couldn't challenge. Impossible, she heard Derek mutter as she jumped down and kept going. The course continued with various challenges. A rope climb that Sophie scaled without pausing. A series of heavy objects to move that were designed to test strength. Sophie lifted each one easily, her muscles barely straining. Around her, other candidates struggled and gasped for air. In the stands, Sophie could see the examiners watching. Lydia, the kind Centauri clerk from registration, was leaning forward with obvious fascination. Next to her, Kelvin sat rigid and still, but something in his posture suggested alarm. Sophie reached the final obstacle. The reinforced door stood 2.5 meters tall, made of some kind of dark metal alloy. A control panel next to it blinked with alien symbols. This was the problem-solving portion of the test. Candidates were supposed to decipher the locking mechanism and open the door using logic and patience. Sophie looked at the door. Then she looked at the control panel. Then she looked back at the door. She'd been doing everything the proper way so far, following the course as designed. But something occurred to her in that moment. The test was supposed to measure basic fitness and capability. It was supposed to be challenging. But for Sophie, raised on a world where simply surviving required constant strength and adaptation, this wasn't challenging at all. And maybe it was time to make that point clear. Sophie took 3 steps back. She evaluated the door's construction, noting the hinges on the left side, the way it was mounted in its frame. She thought about all the times she'd kicked open stuck doors in Earth's older buildings, where humidity and age made everything swell and stick. Then she ran forward and kicked the door with everything she had. The impact rang through the arena like a thunderclap. The reinforced door, rated to withstand 2,000 newtons of force according to the specifications, exploded off its hinges. It flew backward through the opening and crashed to the ground on the other side, metal screeching against the arena floor. Silence fell over the grand arena. Every candidate stopped what they were doing. Every spectator in the stands went quiet. Even the neutral computer voice seemed to pause in shock. Sophie walked through the empty doorway, her breathing still steady and calm. Course completed, the computer finally announced, its tone somehow managing to sound uncertain. Time, 11 minutes, 43 seconds. New record. The silence held for another moment. Then whispers began to spread through the crowd like wildfire. Did you see that? She kicked it down. Deathworld or strength. That door was reinforced. In the stands, Lydia was on her feet, her eyes wide with amazement. She was saying something to the other examiners, gesturing excitedly toward Sophie. Next to her, Kelvin remained seated, but his metallic features had shifted into an expression that Sophie recognized. She'd seen it before on people who suddenly realized they'd underestimated something dangerous. Derek crossed the finish line several minutes later, exhausted and defeated. He stared at the broken door lying on the ground, then at Sophie who stood nearby looking barely winded. His expression mixed disbelief with something that might have been the first hint of respect. "You're from a .8 gravity world," Sophie said to him quietly. "Maybe .6? .6, Derek admitted, still breathing hard. "Earth is 1.0, Sophie explained. And our temperature swings from -40 to +50 degrees depending on location and season. Our atmosphere has electrical storms that can kill you instantly. We have predators, diseases, and natural disasters that would wipe out most species. We call it home." She walked past him toward the exit, where Lydia was waiting with a data pad, her expression caught between delight and concern. "That was remarkable," Lydia said softly. "But Sophie, you've just made yourself very visible. Kelvin is afraid of what you represent." "Good," Sophie replied. "Fear means they're finally paying attention." The physical trials had eliminated half the candidates. Sophie watched them leave the station, some disappointed, others relieved to escape with their dignity intact. Those who remained gathered in the judicial hall, a vast chamber with walls that seemed to absorb sound, creating an atmosphere of heavy anticipation. Round 2 would test their minds instead of their bodies. Sophie had studied the records carefully. The psychological examination was where most promising candidates failed. Not because they lacked intelligence but because they broke under pressure that was designed specifically to shatter composure. "You will each enter a simulated courtroom," explained one of the senior examiners, an ancient being whose species Sophie didn't recognize. "You will be given an impossible case to defend. Your opponent will be a holographic construct designed by our best legal minds. Your composure, reasoning, and ability to maintain professional standards under extreme stress will be evaluated. Many of you will not pass. This is expected and carries no shame." The candidates were called one by one. Sophie watched through observation windows as others entered the simulation chambers. Some emerged after only 10 minutes, faces pale and hands shaking. One candidate, a usually confident Methodian, came out in tears. Another refused to speak about what had happened inside, simply gathering their belongings and leaving the station entirely. Derek went before Sophie. She watched him enter the chamber with his characteristic pride, shoulders back and head high. Through the observation window, she could see the simulated courtroom materialize around him. His holographic opponent appeared, a fierce-looking construct that immediately began attacking his arguments. Derek fought back well at first, his warrior training giving him mental discipline. But 20 minutes in, Sophie saw his composure start to crack. His movements became agitated. His voice rose. When he emerged 30 minutes later, he looked exhausted and defeated. "Sophie Grant," the examiner called. Sophie entered the simulation chamber. The world around her shifted and reformed until she stood in a perfect replica of a galactic courtroom. The judge's bench loomed above her. A jury box filled with representatives from a dozen species watched with cold, evaluating eyes. And across from her, at the opposing counsel's table, a holographic figure materialized. The construct was deliberately designed to be intimidating. Tall, imposing, with features that suggested authority and contempt. It smiled at her, but there was no warmth in the expression. "The human," it said, its voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "How appropriate. Let me present your case, defender. Your client has been caught with stolen property. Multiple witnesses saw the theft. Physical evidence is overwhelming. Your client's guilt is beyond any reasonable doubt. Your task is to defend them. Good luck." The simulation began. Sophie presented her opening argument, focusing on procedural concerns and the need for fair representation regardless of apparent guilt. It was a standard approach, one she'd practiced countless times at the academy. The holographic opponent stood. "Objection. Counsel is wasting the court's time. Her client is obviously guilty. But then what should we expect from a human? A species that has never understood the meaning of justice." Sophie kept her voice level. "Personal attacks on counsel are inappropriate." "Personal attacks?" The construct laughed. "I'm simply stating facts. Humans come from a world so violent that they spent thousands of years killing each other over resources, beliefs, and territory. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They nearly drove themselves to extinction multiple times through sheer brutality. And now one of them stands here, pretending to understand justice." The simulated jury nodded along. The judges looked down at Sophie with expressions of agreement. This was the trap. The The psychological warfare. The test wasn't really about defending the impossible case. It was about maintaining composure while everything you valued was attacked. Sophie took a breath. Your Honor, I move that opposing counsel's comments be stricken from the record. Motion denied, the simulated judge responded. Continue. The holographic opponent circled closer. Tell me, human, how many wars has your species fought? How many millions have died because your people couldn't control their primitive emotions? You speak of justice, but your entire history is written in blood. What makes you think you have any right to stand in this courtroom? Sophie felt anger rising in her chest. It was exactly what the simulation wanted. Break her composure. Make her respond emotionally instead of rationally. Prove that humans were too unstable for galactic law. But then something shifted in her mind. The anger didn't disappear, but it transformed. Because everything the construct was saying was true. Earth's history was violent. Humanity had committed terrible acts. They had nearly destroyed themselves. And that was exactly why she belonged here. You're right, Sophie said quietly. The courtroom went still. Even the holographic opponent seemed surprised. Humanity has a violent past, Sophie continued, her voice gaining strength. We fought wars. We made terrible mistakes. We caused immense suffering. These are facts and I won't deny them. But Your Honor, I would argue that this history doesn't disqualify us from understanding justice. It makes us essential to it. She stepped forward, addressing the simulated judges directly. Most species in this galaxy come from gentle worlds. They evolved in stable environments with abundant resources. They developed civilization without the constant threat of extinction. That's admirable. That's wonderful. But it also means they've never had to truly grapple with injustice in its rawest forms. The holographic opponent tried to interrupt, but Sophie kept going. Humans know what injustice looks like because we've lived it. We've been both victims and perpetrators. We understand how easily good intentions can lead to terrible outcomes. We know how systems can be corrupted, how power can be abused, how fear can drive people to cruelty. Not because we're inherently evil, but because we survived a world that forced us to confront these realities every single day. She turned to face the jury. The defendant I'm assigned to defend is guilty. The evidence shows that clearly. But do you know what a human sees when they look at a guilty person? We see someone who made a choice. We see circumstances that led to that choice. We see the possibility of understanding, of rehabilitation, of growth. Because we come from a species that has done terrible things and learned from them. We've built peace from war. We've created justice from chaos. We've taken our violent history and used it to understand why justice matters. Sophie's voice filled the courtroom now. So yes, I am human. Yes, my people have blood in our past. But that past taught us something that matters more than any legal text. It taught us that justice isn't just about rules and procedures. It's about understanding why people fail, why systems break down, and how to build something better. Those who have never known injustice can enforce rules. But those who have suffered it, who have caused it, who have lived through it and emerged determined to do better. We understand what justice actually means. The simulation flickered. For a moment, Sophie could see the observation room beyond, where the real examiners sat watching. She saw Lydia on her feet, hands pressed against the window. She saw other examiners leaning forward, clearly moved by her words. The holographic opponent stood silent, apparently unable to formulate a response the simulation's programming hadn't prepared for. The defendant deserves representation not because they're innocent, Sophie concluded, but because everyone deserves someone who understands that guilt isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the path toward something better. That's what humans understand. That's what our violent history taught us. And that's exactly why we belong in this courtroom. The simulation ended abruptly. The courtroom dissolved around her, replaced by the plain walls of the chamber. Sophie stood alone, her heart pounding, suddenly aware that she'd just revealed something deeply personal in front of everyone watching. The door opened. Lydia rushed in, her purple face glowing with emotion. Sophie, that was incredible. I've never seen anyone turn the psychological attack around like that. Sophie emerged to find the other candidates staring at her. Some looked impressed. Others seemed frightened by the intensity of what they'd witnessed. Derek stood near the back of the group, his expression completely changed from the disdain he'd shown before. I was wrong about you, Derek said simply. That took more strength than anything in the physical trials. The senior examiner approached, reviewing data on a tablet. Sophie Grant, you pass round 2 with the highest marks recorded in 15 years. The examiner paused, then added quietly, you made us see something we'd never considered before. But as the other candidates congratulated her, Sophie noticed Kelvin standing apart from the group. His metallic face showed no emotion, but his posture radiated cold disapproval. He approached slowly, each step measured and deliberate. "You gave an impressive performance," Kelvin said, his voice like ice. "But emotions and speeches won't save you in the final trial. That is where candidates face real consequences, real ethical dilemmas with no easy answers. That is where your human instinct for drama will fail you. I promise you that." He walked away, leaving Sophie with both triumph and dread mixing in her chest. She had won this round, but Kelvin's warning hung in the air like a threat. Only 23 candidates remained for the final trial. They gathered in the council's grand chamber, where real galactic judges presided over cases that shaped the future of entire civilizations. The weight of history pressed down on everyone present. Sophie could feel it in the silence, in the way even the most confident candidates shifted nervously in their seats. Kelvin stood at the center of the chamber, his metallic features reflecting the soft light from above. "The final challenge is not a simulation," he announced. "You will address a real case that has divided our galaxy for 3 years. The Judiciary Council has been unable to reach a verdict. Your task is to propose a solution. You will present your arguments to a live panel of sitting galactic judges. They will evaluate not just your legal reasoning, but your wisdom, your compassion, and your ability to serve justice in its truest form." A holographic display materialized, showing the details of the case. Sophie read carefully, her mind already beginning to analyze the problem. The colony ship Meridian Dawn had been carrying 3,000 colonists to a new world. Halfway through the journey, a catastrophic systems failure threatened the entire ship. The ship's artificial intelligence, an entity named Chorus, faced an impossible choice. It could attempt to save everyone and risk total failure, or it could sacrifice 30 crew members in the engineering section to guarantee the survival of the remaining passengers. Chorus chose to seal the engineering section. 30 people died. 3,000 lived. Now Chorus was on trial. The families of the 30 dead demanded justice. They argued that the AI had committed murder. But AI rights advocates across the galaxy warned that punishing Chorus would set a dangerous precedent. It would tell every AI that saving lives could result in their destruction. The case had become a symbol of the growing tension between organic life and artificial intelligence. "You have 2 hours to prepare," Kelvin said. "Then you will present in the order you were called. The judges will question you. Some of you will offer legal arguments. Some will offer moral philosophy. All of you will fail to provide a real answer, because there is no answer that satisfies everyone. That is the nature of justice." The candidates dispersed to preparation rooms. Sophie sat alone, reviewing the case files. She read testimonies from the families who had lost loved ones. She studied Chorus's decision-making process, the calculations it had made in those terrible seconds. She examined legal precedents from dozens of worlds. Most candidates would argue one side or the other. Either Chorus was guilty and must face consequences, or Chorus was innocent and must be protected. Both positions had merit. Both positions had fatal flaws. Sophie thought about Earth. She thought about the conflicts her species had endured, the terrible choices people had made, the aftermath of decisions where there were no good options. She thought about something her professor at the academy had once said: "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment or absolution. Sometimes it's about acknowledgement and healing." The presentations began. Sophie watched as candidate after candidate approached the judge's bench. A Methodian argued for strict liability, saying that Chorus must be held accountable regardless of intent. A Plenthian argued for complete immunity, saying that emergency decisions couldn't be judged by normal standards. A Velcorian proposed a compromise where Chorus would be deactivated but its code preserved for study. Each argument was logical. Each argument was well-reasoned. And each argument left the judges looking unsatisfied. The families in the gallery, present to observe, showed pain and frustration with every proposal. None of the solutions addressed their grief. None of the solutions felt like justice. Derek presented before Sophie. He argued for a measured response, suggesting that Chorus be temporarily suspended while better protocols were developed. It was a careful, diplomatic answer. The judges nodded politely and thanked him. But Sophie could see it wasn't enough. "Sophie Grant," the head judge called. Sophie approached the bench. The 5 judges watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. In the gallery she saw Lydia sitting with the other examiners. Kelvin stood in the back, arms crossed, waiting for her to fail. "Honorable judges," Sophie began, "I've listened to many brilliant legal arguments today. My fellow candidates have demonstrated exceptional knowledge of galactic law. But I believe we're approaching this case from the wrong direction. One of the judges, an elderly centauri, leaned forward. Explain. We're asking whether Chorus is guilty or innocent, Sophie said. We're trying to determine punishment or protection. But those are binary choices, and this situation isn't binary. 30 people died. 3,000 people lived. Both of those facts are true. Both of those facts matter. And any solution that ignores either one fails to serve justice. She took a breath, organizing her thoughts. On Earth, my species went through terrible conflicts. We did terrible things to each other. And eventually, we learned that sometimes the path to justice isn't through courts and punishment. Sometimes it's through what we call restorative justice and reconciliation processes. We're familiar with Earth's primitive attempts at conflict resolution, Kelvin interrupted from the back. They have no place in galactic law. With respect, Council Chair, they have every place here, Sophie replied. Because this case isn't just about law. It's about loss, about impossible choices, and about how we move forward when there are no good answers. She turned back to the judges. I propose a three-part solution. First, we acknowledge what happened. Chorus made a choice that resulted in 30 deaths. That choice also saved 3,000 lives. Both truths must be formally recognized by this council. Chorus cannot be declared simply guilty or innocent because the reality is more complex than those labels allow. The judges were listening intently now. Even Kelvin had gone quiet. Second, we create a memorial, Sophie continued. Not just a monument but a living memorial. A foundation in the names of the 30 who died, dedicated to improving emergency protocols on colony ships. Their deaths weren't meaningless. They were part of an impossible situation, and we honor them by making sure future AIs have better options. The families participate in this foundation. They help shape the safety measures that will protect others. One of the families in the gallery, a woman who had lost her husband, wiped tears from her eyes. But she was nodding. Third, we establish a support system, Sophie said. Chorus carries the weight of its decision. The families carry the weight of their loss. We create a process where they can speak to each other, where acknowledgement and understanding can happen. Not forced forgiveness. Not demanded reconciliation. Just the opportunity for both sides to be heard, to be seen, to process what happened together. Sophie's voice grew stronger. This isn't about letting Chorus escape consequences. It's about recognizing that in situations like this, traditional justice fails everyone. The families don't want revenge. They want their loved ones to be remembered and their deaths to mean something. Chorus doesn't need punishment or protection. It needs acknowledgement that it faced an impossible choice and chose the option that saved the most lives. She looked directly at Kelvin. You said there's no answer that satisfies everyone. You're right. But there is an answer that honors everyone. That's what Earth's history taught us. When we stopped asking who to punish and started asking how to heal, we found a different kind of justice. One that doesn't erase the pain but transforms it into something that prevents future pain. The chamber was silent. Sophie could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She had laid out everything she believed, everything her studies and her humanity had taught her. Now it was up to the judges. The head judge, a wise-looking being with silver skin, spoke softly. In 30 years on this bench, I have never heard a proposal quite like this. You've given us something to consider beyond simple legal precedent. Another judge added, you've shown us that justice can exist outside our traditional frameworks. In the gallery, Derek stood up. Every eye turned to him. Honorable judges, I request permission to speak. The head judge nodded. Proceed. I was wrong about humans, Derek said clearly, his voice carrying through the chamber. I judged Sophie Grant and her species based on prejudice and fear. But her solution today shows more wisdom than any of us demonstrated. She didn't just understand the law. She understood what the law is supposed to serve. If this is what humans bring to galactic justice, then we need them here. We need their perspective. I was wrong and I say it publicly so everyone knows. Other candidates murmured agreement. Even some of the judges nodded. The evaluations took an hour. When the results were announced, Sophie's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Sophie Grant, the head judge announced, you have placed first in the trial of advocates. Your solution to the Chorus case has been forwarded to the full Judiciary Council for serious consideration. You have demonstrated not just legal knowledge, but wisdom we desperately need in our courts. The chamber erupted in applause. Lydia was crying happy tears. Derek approached and offered his hand in the human gesture of respect he'd clearly learned just for this moment. But Sophie's eyes found Kelvin in the back of the room. His expression was unreadable, but his posture radiated tension. She had won. She had shattered 200 years of precedent. And something in Kelvin's stance told her that the real battle was just beginning.